approved. Lindsay, do you guys
So
need to do
I think we
anything
just
here?
have to do a roll call, don't we?
Yep. Sean Anderson.
Here.
Jamie Anderson. Frank Riddle. Lee Jerkins. Terry Gelman. Here.
Okay. I had an opportunity to be, I think, at one of them, it might not have been the last city council meeting, but one of the things that was mentioned is to try to set up a date where we could jointly meet. And then I believe that we have, is it John Danos?
Yes.
Is it John and Amy both are going to be talking to us?
John and Amy both.
So what the plan of attack is to go ahead and to call them up. They are what you would be your bond counsel, is that right?
Right, our bonding attorneys.
And just kind of, I don't know, maybe some of you have a lot of background in TIF, maybe some of you don't. I know that Ben has handed out some information. Thank you for doing that. Does everyone know everyone? I mean, is there anyone that doesn't know everyone? I want to make sure that everyone's familiar with.
Do we have a guest?
Yes, Brenda Dreyer.
Okay.
And I'm with the Ames Chamber of Commerce.
Okay. Would you mind signing in? Just for
Sure. I didn't even see it. I
Welcome.
would have done that. I know the drill.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Brent.
So before you
Before you
die,
die.
Okay.
yeah, I mean, I don't have any background on what we're even, other than a TIF. So I haven't been privy, and many others have, but I mean, what's basically on the table, and can you just give an high-level overview first before we start talking about backgrounds?
I'd be glad to.
Thanks.
We don't have any TIF districts in the city limits today. I don't think there's any in the school district.
Right.
And other than maybe your background up at Dyke, I don't think anybody's got any experience with a TIF district. So Ben's trying to develop the property on what we call Eastgate Development, which is between the middle school and the high school. And one of the things that he's asked for is to create a TIF district. Well, historically, when that word comes up, everybody immediately has a response. And it's usually based off of a story from somewhere. And since we don't have any experience with it, and school districts are one of the pieces that get heavily affected by that, we thought it'd be easier than for us to make any action on it, to be sure everybody's on the same page and understand the real story from somebody knows what they're doing, as opposed to telling stories about what happened at the various communities around the area. So that was the thought process. Ben, I'll sure let you add anything else you want, but other than that, I don't have anything else. I mean, I'm here to learn too.
The people on the phone are to provide what?
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's the basics of TIF districts.
To explain to us
What they're for, and
what it is.
what their purpose is, and what the
Okay.
ramifications are.
Okay. Yeah. So okay.
So currently, what the city has provided for incentive for developers is an abatement.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm simply proposing another option.
Mm-hmm.
What's the difference between an abatement and the TIF?
So
in simple words.
In simple words, an abatement is no taxes are paid for in a certain amount of period of years. The commercial abatement that the city has provided is a 3-year, 100% abatement, where if you put in business, you're not paying any taxes for 3 years. I'm proposing to, instead of that, I am paying taxes, or the businesses are paying taxes. However, those tax monies are used to reimburse me for the investment of putting in the roads and the infrastructure for the commercial district. And then there's a portion where there's a lot that the lawyer can kind of give a good scope of. There's portions of those monies that are then allocated to the schools, levies, things like that, that the bond counsel can explain further.
And the time limits on those are part of this conversation then too, or is it until your initial investment is paid back and some?
It would be, yeah, it would be until once the initial investment's paid back, then it's done. It's complete.
Okay. So, Ben, just a question: if this goes into a TIF, this commercial portion, it will be in a TIF. You will state how long it will be in there, like if it's 5 years or if it's 10 years. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm proposing a 10-year TIF. But with that assuming that I think I could get it done within 3 to 5 years, but I'm asking for 10 years just in case of bad weather, wars, things like that, things that you can't project that might happen that might slow up the development. But as I see it now, I believe I could get it done within 3 to 5 years.
Maximum 10, right?
Maximum 10 if something bad were to happen, I suppose.
I don't know if I can ask this question, but I'm going to, and if you don't want to answer, that's fine. Can you give us an idea of how much we're looking at that would be valuation that would be put in this debt?
From my understanding, research from the Ames Chamber of Commerce, tax valuations are around, once it's complete, the tax valuations for these 4 acres would be around $200,000 annually. And that's just an estimated projection. Those are based off of, so I provided, just give an idea of how much commercial we're talking and a general idea of the concept. If you refer to the maps I passed out, this one right here, if you refer to the maps here, I'm proposing to connect where the consignment gallery sits in between the storage units and consignment gallery. There's a dead end road there. I'm proposing to connect that road to 2nd Street and make that a commercial road, commercial district on both sides. To give an idea of how much commercial that would be, a local comparative that I've provided in one of the handouts in the stack that you guys got there is Northridge Parkway. Northridge Parkway provides the same amount of length and depth in Somerset area that this street would provide. So that gives an idea of how much commercial that would be on that street once it's fully developed. So that street, that would be the street where the cafe sits, if you're familiar with that road there. Thank you.
And this is only for the commercial portion that you're tipping?
Yes, only for the commercial portion. I would like to note that historically the city provided, paid for the street and infrastructure for the consignment gallery. However, with the projects that the city has incurred, freshwater and wastewater, they don't have the money to provide for a project like this. So I'm proposing a TIF where I'll incur the expenses, I'll pay for the road, the infrastructure, and then just recouped with those taxes over a given amount of time.
So the drawing you provided has both commercial and residential. You're saying the TIF is only for the
TIF is only commercial, yep.
This portion? On the picture, what is this?
Yes.
This portion? Okay.
4 acres.
Yep.
The
About 4
whatever,
acres.
5 or so lots, it looks like.
Yep, 5 lots there. Now those lots will be smaller. That's just a general idea of, those lots will be thinner, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Smaller building lots will be in there.
So I reserve the right to ask the last 2 questions because I'm But, so the taxes that are paid, so if you were to develop this and businesses didn't move in,
Then I'm paying the taxes on
then
it.
you're paying the taxes, and then, let's say 8 years in, all of a sudden, there's a big boom, and then people do move in for a couple of years, they would be paying, do you know what I'm saying? Like, does it start, when does the 10-year clock start?
The 10-year clock starts once, and that actually might be a question for the attorney. I think that can be negotiated, really.
Okay.
I would like the 10-year period to start once the first building is erected. That's when I would like the 10-year period to start.
Not necessarily when there's the first occupant. I imagine they probably are one and the same, but.
Once the first building is built and occupied, then the clock would start. That would be how I'd assume it would start.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Tyler.
And all of this is in the city limits.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is in the heart of Gilbert, not asking for any annexations. This is under the comprehensive plan of Gilbert. This is the location that they want commercial. The reason I'm proposing doing commercial, when I originally purchased the land, sorry I'm taking too long, but
No, this is good.
when I originally purchased the land, I was thinking a lot more residential. But I think that there's definitely, you got to make a push for it, but I think there is value in getting commercial in Gilbert to sustain the community. So for simple amenities, you don't have to drive to Ames. I think the school district here has a great reputation, and I think the city could help accommodate that with just a little bit of commercial here. It would be a great addition to the community.
Ready to call?
If you are the chairperson, press the star key now. Please enter your chairperson passcode and press pound.
This is access code.
Yes.
Try it again.
Your entry 6993275 is not valid. Please enter the correct digit, then press pound.
Maybe it's not chairman then.
About 0.
It's like Emmitsburg's got experience in tips. 10%.
That's interesting.
No.
I think when it gets blue, it gets a little bit too much. You look at Ballard. It's one of the
Your
highest,
entry 0 is not
24%.
valid.
That's
Please
one of
enter the correct digit, then press
Our
pound.
story doesn't say for
There you go.
Bryson's killing it.
Maybe I
You
won't.
do.
The beta's probably,
You start.
is that the ethanol and all that out there to get tip?
Boy,
Do you know?
John,
Do you know where Nevada's is?
I have no idea.
The Nevada?
I don't know. How that's handled.
Yeah, Colonesco.
I think that's some of the wind.
Ballard.
approximately, that's it.
Ballard's.
Ballard's 24.4%.
New housing.
New housing?
The new housing subdivisions and the industrial park.
Wow, it's 10.
When you first come into town on the north part?
I think those are all tied
Hmm.
Gail?
Joined.
Did you just make that up? No, it's going. Hello?
Hello,
Hello?
this is John in Des Moines.
Hello,
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear us okay?
I can hear you.
Good deal. Good deal.
This is Gilbert.
So John, this is, my name's Sonia. I've been emailing with you.
Yeah, hi Sonia.
Hi. We have the Gilbert School District and members of the City Council here, and the developer, Ben.
Good evening.
Good evening.
So this is where we just start
Take it
rattling
away.
off questions.
So John, do you have something to kind of present to lead us through this, or what's it? I think we're ready to go on our end then, if you are.
Okay, yeah, very good. I wasn't sure if you guys had any preliminary matters you wanted to attend to or anything, so.
I think we're ready to go.
Ready.
Excellent. Well, I'm glad to make your acquaintance. My name's John. I'm a lawyer. Please don't hold it against me. I have the good fortune to work in the area of municipal finance, and I spend most of my law practice helping cities like yours to borrow money when they need to for a variety of public purposes. As sort of an ancillary to that, we also do quite a bit of work in the arena of economic development and redevelopment projects for our city school district or with the city, almost everything that our local governments in Iowa have in terms of fuel to put into the budgetary engine are dollars that are derived out of our property tax system. For cities, the main tools that are available to help with economic development and redevelopment projects are, not surprisingly, based or rooted in the property tax system. One of those tools is property tax abatement or tax exemption, which I think is a tool that as a community you guys have at least some familiarity with, because if I'm to understand it correctly and if memory serves right, I do think you guys have at least had some limited applications of tax abatement in the past. The other major tool that gets a lot of use in this arena is tax increment financing, which is affectionately referred to as TIF. And I'll spend most of my time, because that's really what Tony had asked me to do, visiting with you folks a little bit about TIF. And I will allude a little bit to property tax abatement, because I do want to highlight for you folks and make sure that you've got a little bit of understanding of how the two tools relate to one another and how they're different. Sonia, did you have a chance to run copies of the packet of information I had sent over?
Yep, and everyone has a copy.
Okay, so everybody's got that in front of them, and I'll refer to that a little bit as I make some comments. Unless anybody sort of start panicking and looking for the exit right away, we're not going to go verbatim over all of these pages. You guys have, I'm sure, other business you need to attend to. I just want to try to give you a little bit of a primer on how this tool works, so that you feel conversant in it as you try to make some policy decisions going forward. So let's talk just a little bit about TIF and what it is, where it comes from. Iowa has had a law on the books for decades called the Urban Renewal Law. It's Chapter 403 of the Code of Iowa. And this law was actually adopted, I think maybe initially in the late 50s or early 60s, in order to help cities in Iowa deal with growing conditions of slum and blight. And as you might imagine, at that time, most of those conditions were happening in the larger population centers. So it was really initially very much a redevelopment tool. And TIF, somebody came up with a clever idea for TIF in order to try to help cities come up with local match dollars to qualify for federal grants. And over the years, the tool was used, but as you might expect, it was used primarily by the larger cities, the Des Moines and Cedar Rapids and Davenports of the world. Fast forward to the 80s, we had the farm crisis happening in the state, and at the time, somebody thought it would be a good idea to amend the Urban Renewal Law to let cities and counties use TIF under circumstances in which you didn't have slums developing or blighted problems, but rather in places just where we had a need for economic development activity. In essence, meaning job creation, job retention, workforce housing type issues, and the like. And so that change in the 80s really opened the tool up to a whole bunch of different programmatic type uses that we see today. For the most part, those uses can really be characterized, I think, in three major groupings. One main use of the tool, and we see quite a lot of it, is to help with getting public infrastructure improvements built. we do see the tool used to help with the construction or improvement of other types of non-infrastructure public facilities. And then the final category really gets into the realm of sort of direct assistance or public-private partnering with local businesses to help provide needed cash flow support to businesses in their expansion or improvement efforts that may directly or secondarily relate to job creation or job retention. And most often we see this in the form of what we call TIP rebate style agreements. And we'll get into what those look like in a little bit more detail in just a few minutes. But those are the three main categories of projects that we see undertaken using this urban renewal and TIP power. A couple of things that you need to understand about the tool. It is an extraordinary power, and I think I'll be able to illustrate that for you in just a few minutes, because I do want you to understand what the power of TIP is. And because it's an extraordinary power, the legislature has seen fit to put a lot of procedural due process in the mix. So if you're going to get to use this power as a city, there are a whole bunch of public hoops that need to be navigated. And like it or not, right or wrong, they are there. I have provided you folks with a procedural outline of the steps that need to be followed in order to establish an urban renewal area. I think it's the second to last page in your packet. We're not going to go over all of those tonight. If you do decide to undertake some urban renewal and TIP activity, Sonia is going to become more familiar with that outline than she ever dreamed she was going to. And in part, that's why you keep legal counsel on board, is to help make sure that that set of steps gets navigated. The most important thing I would draw your attention to is there is, in addition to city council meetings and resolutions and ordinances, all of which you have to attend to, there are notifications and consultations that have to be taken care of as part of that process, including having a consultation meeting with the school district and the county prior to doing anything to adopt your urban renewal plan or even hold a hearing on it. And so just bear in mind that process typically will take at least a month start to finish, bookended by a couple of city council meetings. And so in terms of planning and allowing for adequate time to get any projects done using TIP, you do need to make sure you're building in about 4 to 6 weeks to allow time for the procedural steps that have to happen. And if anybody is feeling really curious about any of those steps, I'm happy to entertain any questions, or I can just refer you to the outline. Another important thing to note, anytime you set up an urban renewal area and you want to use TIP, you have to adopt an urban renewal plan to govern the programs and activities within that area. And the law requires that that plan include several types of detail. You're going to have a legal description of the area. And so you're going to have to be able to identify geographically what ground you want included. In addition to that, the plan now under the modern law does require specificity about each and every project that you want to take on in that area. So if you refer back to the 3 categories of projects that I mentioned to you, just hypothetically, if you wanted to do a project to enhance one of your city parks, and you also knew you wanted to do a project to put in a turn lane on Main Street, And in addition to that, you also wanted to do a project to offer a rebate incentive to a little industrial business that was going to be developing in town. That would be 3 distinct projects, and we would help you to describe each of those projects on its own merits, with its own details, as part of your urban renewal plan. And then a year later, if you come along and things have gone gangbusters for the industrial business, and they're now going to buy the next door parcel and expand, and you're going to do yet another rebate for them, relative to that, we would process through an amendment to the plan to support that new project, and so on and so forth as time goes on. I'll refer you to, I think it's the 3rd page of your packet, steps to follow. Do you see that one?
Yes.
6 bullet points on that.
Yes.
Everybody looking at that?
Yes.
Okay. This is probably the briefest page in the packet, but to my mind, when you're using TIF, it probably is the most important. And I do want to highlight each of these steps for you, because I just think they're critical. Under the modern urban renewal and TIF law, things have to go in a particular order. And if you follow the first 5 steps on here, you will never, ever get things out of order, and therefore you'll be a long ways down the road to keeping things legal, which, as a lawyer, I encourage you to do. But first and foremost, you've got to identify and plan a bit for a project. The urban renewal and TIF law, in the modern sense, is a very specific tool. It's more of a rifle shot type tool as opposed to a shotgun. So it focuses around projects, and that's when we start getting busy with urban renewal and TIF, is when we have a project. And so the first thing is to identify and plan a project. Are we widening that street? Do we have a rebate incentive with a particular business or developer, etc.? Once you've learned enough about your project to be able to answer at least the basic reporter type questions, then we need to get in and make sure we're establishing an urban renewal plan or amending an urban renewal plan to include the ground where the project's going to happen, and to identify for the public some of those details about the project. The third point is critical, and not a lot of people understand this natively, but TIF is a debt repayment tool. In that sense, it's a lot like your general obligation debt that you might have as a city. The debt service levy for GO debt, you only get to levy that tax if you have GO debt to pay off, general obligation debt to pay off. Well, in similar fashion, you only get access to TIF revenues through the property tax system if you have a TIF debt obligation incurred. So you have to owe money in some fashion, either internally or externally, in order to claim TIF. And so step number 3 is really important. You don't just identify your project and put it in the plan and then start asking for TIF like a Christmas wish list to pay for the project in advance. You need to incur some debt to pay for your project. Then you claim TIF to repay the debt. the details that the law requires so that they could begin, whenever the TIF becomes available, satisfying that claim and getting the TIF dollars to you so you could repay the bank. Step 5 is sort of the fun one, at least for anybody who's loaned you money. You use the TIF dollars to repay your debts. And then item 6 is just kind of a fun way of saying, when the next project comes along, you need to repeat this process each and every time. So those steps are the steps that we really highlight to our clients from kind of a macro level. Keep those in order, and you're going to be all right. Start getting out of order, and you're going to really run the potential for some pretty serious questions from the county and or the State Department of Management or your auditors, if you are ever audited or examined, about what's happening. And I would say to you, probably the most frequent pitfall that we run into, in case you couldn't tell from my comments, is item 3, people not realizing that they can't just jump to number 4 and start telling the county to send them TIF because, oh, we need to do the street project in a couple of years. We're going to accumulate funds. That really is not the way it is supposed to work. You're supposed to go into debt to fund your projects, and then you get the TIF dollars. So I want to tell you just for a couple of minutes mechanically how TIF works. And I'm going to shortcut this as best I can just for the sake of time and start by telling you what TIF is not. If you're not familiar with it, nobody would blame you. And if you are, forgive me for redundancy. But the property tax system in Iowa is really just based on 2 pretty straightforward variables in a formula. So if we want to know how much tax John owes in a particular year on his house, we really only need to know 2 things. We need to know the valuation of his house in the eyes of the property tax system, and we need to know the levy rate. It used to be called the millage rate in Iowa. Now the law refers to it as the levy rate of property tax that's in effect on John's house at that particular time. And let's talk about those just for a second. When we talk about valuation, we have to know 2 things. We have to know what the county assessor thinks of the property, because that's the local government official charged with coming up with valuations. And we call that the assessed valuation. So the county assessor might come out and kick the tires on John's house and say, that's a $150,000 house, right? The second thing we have to know, though, is rollback. Everybody's heard of rollback, I hope.
Yes.
The state legislature has said it's great that the assessor comes up with these valuations, but for property tax purposes, we are going to apply some kind of rollback reduction on different, and it's different for every different kind of property. Like, for example, for commercial and industrial properties, it's a 10% rollback by law. And right now, roughly speaking, for residential properties, it's a 50% rollback. So if the rollback were 50% for residential, and John's house was assessed at $150,000, well, for purposes of the property tax system, John's house is going to be at $75,000 of taxable valuation, right? So that's one variable. The other variable in the formula is the levy rate. And that's going to differ from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. But at where I live, in West Des Moines, my property is subject to property taxes from a handful of different taxing jurisdictions, right? I've got the city of West Des Moines taxing me. I'm in Polk County, so Polk County is taxing me. Moines School District, they're taxing me. I'm in the Des Moines Area Community College, DMAC. I'm in their taxing jurisdiction, so they're taxing me. And there's a township levy. The state brucellosis tax to help keep the swine herds healthy if they decide to impose it, whatever. You see the point. You can look at your tax statement and you'll see the list of taxing jurisdictions that have taxing power over property in Gilbert. And if you take the levy rates from each of those entities and you add them all together, like the county auditor does every year, you'll come up with the consolidated property tax levy rate that's being imposed on your property, and I could do the same for mine. But let's pretend for illustration purposes that the consolidated levy rate on John's property is $40 per thousand. And to make the math easy, please, let's just assume that the taxable valuation of John's property for starting point is $10,000. Okay? So, for you mathematicians in the room, if I'm being taxed at $40 per thousand on a $10,000 property, how much tax am I going to owe in a year?
He's waiting.
Anybody want to help me out?
Come on, Deb.
10 times 40, what?
400.
Yeah.
$400. Thank you. So I'm going to $400 of property tax in a year. Believe me, I am getting the tip. Let's assume my property is not in a TIF district, not in an urban renewal area, it's just regular taxation. I pay my $400 of tax under the circumstances I just described. What happens to the tax dollars after I pay them? This is the critical point. I'll tell you what happens. We make it rain for all of those taxing jurisdictions that have authority to tax my property. And so they're each going to get their proportionate share of my $400. If the city's portion of the levy rate was $10 per thousand, well, they're going to get, what would it be, 25% of my tax payment. And if the school districts was another $10 per thousand, they're going to get 25%. And maybe the county was $7, they would get their share. You see the point. In a normal property tax setting, when I pay my taxes, the dollars that I pay are just going to get divided up amongst all of the taxing jurisdictions, each in accordance with their proportionate share of the consolidated tax levy rate. That's outside of a TIF district. Let's now put John, well, forget it, we're not going into TIF district yet. Yes, but let's pretend I improve my property. Forget TIF, I just improve it. And the county assessor comes out, and after the smoke clears and roll back and everything else, my tax levy rate has gone up to my valuation, the taxable valuation has gone from $10,000 to now it's $100,000. Okay, so it's gone up tenfold. The levy rate stays the same, $40 a thousand. Now, I'm going to owe $4,000 of tax in a tax cycle. And again, not in a TIF district. Guess what happens to the increased taxes? The exact same thing as before the increase. Those dollars are going to go out to the county, the school district, the city, the state brucellosis tax, etc., each in accordance with their share of the consolidated levy rate. Now, here's what happens with TIF. Before I improve my property, the city puts my property into an urban renewal area and TIF district. They go into debt, they make claim on the TIF, and I improve my property. Same numbers, okay? Same numbers. Well, here's what TIF doesn't do. TIF has no effect on my valuation. Doesn't have any effect. So unlike the tax abatement tool, which you guys have used in the past, which only has effect on the valuation, that's all abatement does, TIF has no effect on that variable in the formula. So my valuation is still going to go up tenfold, whether I'm in the TIF district or not, under my scenario. TIF has no effect on the levy rate. It's not like your GO bond debt service levy that lets you increase the city's share of that levy rate. TIF does not have a direct impact on the levy rate, doesn't give the city any power to control the $40 per thousand up or down. Doesn't do that. So what does it do? It has all of its impact on the distribution side of the property tax formula. So it is not going to change how much tax John, the taxpayer, owes. It simply is a special set of instructions to the county about how they are supposed to allocate and distribute John's taxes after they get paid. And here's how it works. The $400 that I would pay in tax on my unimproved property. Remember, we said before I built the improvements, I was paying $400 a year of tax. But those $400 are going to get distributed out to the local governments in the ordinary fashion. Each gets their own proportionate share. However, the $3,600, that's the incremental increase, that's the I in TIF. The incremental increase in my property tax burden, most of those taxes, not all, but most, will be made available to the city to be placed into the city's TIF fund, which would need to be established on your books, and from there to be used to pay debt obligations that you incur for your projects and programs. That is the power of TIF. It is special instructions to the county that instead of spreading all of those tax dollars around in the ordinary fashion, the new tax dollars, or the lion's share of the new tax dollars that are generated from increased valuations in the TIF district, can be claimed into the TIF fund and used to pay down debt obligations. Now, you've heard me say most of the tax dollars several times, and I need to explain that. There are a few levies that are part of that consolidated levy rate that are protected from the TIF division of revenue, this special allocation. Those are school district physical plant and equipment items. And the folks from the school district might know what the school district PEPL levy is in terms of dollars per thousand. I don't know what it is in your jurisdiction. But both board-approved and voter-approved PEPL levies are protected from TIF. And so if you're in a school district where $1 per thousand of that $40 per thousand consolidated levy rate is attributable to the PEPL levy, then the PEPL levy, the taxes that I pay out of the, remember I had an increased tax burden of $3,600. The taxes that I would pay in that $3,600 that are attributable to the PEPL levy, those would not go to the TIF fund, those would go importantly for everyone in the room, general obligation debt service levy. So the monies that are going to be owed to your bondholders or banker for general obligation debt, those are also held out of the TIF formula or protected from the TIF and would be distributed to the respective local government coffers accordingly. All the other portions of the consolidated levy rate are impacted by the TIF allocation and thus would be made available to the TIF fund accordingly. So let me stop there because I know that can be confusing. And I just want to make sure everybody is on board with that because that is the power of TIF. Anybody have any questions about that mechanically?
John, thank you. That helped clarify what was protected because I think that's important. The PEPL and the GO are protected, so I've got a choir concert to go
now,
to.
One other element that relates, because it is very important, both at the State House right now and on an ongoing basis historically and hopefully into the future for local government coffers, is this. Because of the school student funding equalization formula, the state funds a $5.40 per thousand makeup payment or backfill, if you will, to the school districts for valuations in the school district territory that are utilized for TIF. And so you actually wind up typically in a TIF scenario with more aggregate dollars flowing into the local budget coffers than you would have outside of a TIF scenario because of this backfill that is paid to the school districts from the state. Now this is currently an item for debate in the State House because they are trying to find ways to make what they would like to do with the budget work. And one of the things that recently has been discussed has been carving school district taxes out of the TIF formula entirely, or rather, to put it another way, protecting the whole school district budget in the same fashion that PEPL has been protected so that the state can be relieved of their contribution to economic development, redevelopment projects in the form of this backfill. You guys can, I'll leave it to you to speak with your legislators and learn more about it, or give me a call if you want to talk more about it. But I do think it's important to note in the TIF context that the state has been, for years now, funding the backfill to school districts to help make these kinds of projects possible and to protect funding for students. So you do wind up with not only John paying his taxes, but then also with the state providing this backfill contribution into the school budgets. You do not get that with property tax abatement. And I'm going to jump over to abatement right now while that formula is still fresh in your mind. And I'm going to illustrate for you in 1 minute or less what tax abatement does.
Hey, John, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
On those protected levies, do they continue to be protected if they change, if those levies increase? Is that increased amount still protected, or is it only the protected amount when we make that plan? When we put it into a TIF district?
Let me make sure I try to articulate this the right way. If you don't have a TIF district, they're not protected at all, right? I mean,
Right.
When I pay my $4,000 tax burden outside of a TIF district, the school district will get their share of my taxes relative to all of their levy rate, and the city will and even then, only if I have increased the valuation on my parcel. And so, for example, in a TIF district, the protected levies are irrelevant for the $400, the unimproved value that John pays on his taxes. We call that the base value, frozen base. It's only relevant on the incremental, the taxes applied against the incremental value, the $3,600 that result from me improving my property.
I think the question was.
I don't know if that answers your question.
No.
The question was more about if the levy rates change, right?
Right,
Is it-
so if we're in the TIF district and your improvement has happened within that district, and let's say our GO levy goes from, you know, one rate, 1 year, and 5 years, it goes up 1%. Does that increased percent still
it's still
protected?
protected.
Okay.
Yeah, you could triple your debt service levy, it would all be protected.
John,
Thank you.
Under current law, it would all be protected.
Thank
So
you.
if you're in a TIF district and the school district levies $1 per thousand 1 year for debt service levy, and then the next year you increase your levy rate to your debt service levy rate up to $3 per thousand, and now John, instead of paying it $40 a thousand, now I'm paying it $42 per thousand. All of the debt service levy that you're imposing at whatever time is going to be protected from the TIF distribution of taxes. And the same would go on the school district side for the PEPAL levy if that were to increase, or the instructional support levy. John's tax burden is going up. There's more tax dollars going into the system, and all of those increased tax dollars relative to those particular levy rates are protected from the TIF distribution. So
John,
it can change from time to time, the levy rate, but all of the tax dollars generated relative to that levy, regardless of the levy rate, are protected from TIF. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
John, just a quick question from a school standpoint. One of the things that is not protected is the general fund levy. Is that correct?
General fund levy is not protected, but you do receive the backfill from the state up to $5.40 per thousand relative to that levy.
Okay.
So you do get the dollars made up to you.
As long as they keep the backfill in.
Correct, and I mean, they're not gonna, this is my opinion, okay? They're not gonna stop doing the backfill without carving out a proportionate amount from the TIF formula. And that's not gonna happen. So I think the school, again, this is just one person's perspective and opinion, but I can't imagine a scenario where they say, well, the city can keep accessing, or the county can keep accessing those dollars into the TIF allocation, but we're just done doing the backfill. That is not going to happen.
Okay, thank you.
They have to dismantle the equalization formula for students across the state, and that is, I mean, that will never happen politically.
John, I have a question for you.
So, in other words, if the backfill goes, so goes those dollars out of the TIF side of the equation altogether. Go ahead.
So this part of this proposal is having lots, and what happens in the event that they don't sell? How does the debt payments get repaid on the TIF? Are they just interest-only deals, or how would that work?
Yeah, that's going to vary wildly from deal to deal. Okay. Let me just walk you through a basic example of the type of project that we see come along pretty routinely to try to illustrate what I mean. Let's pretend you've got a site in the city. It's a greenfield site. It's been in the row crops for a while, 10 acres. you pick it, whatever, sewer, water, street work, some kind of combination of public infrastructure that has to get put in the ground in order for that development to be possible, right? We see it happen time and time again, all over the place. Similar scenario. So, the question is, as a city, my goodness, yes, we want this development to happen. We'd like to support our local businesses. We'd love to see the 10 or 15 jobs they're going to create. So we'd love to get that ground into productive use. We've got a $250,000 infrastructure riddle that needs to be solved. How do we solve it? Well, sometimes part of that solution can be TIF. You start by asking the question, who's going to put in the infrastructure? And who is going to pay the contractors and material men to physically get that infrastructure in the ground? And that the answer to that question oftentimes will dictate how a deal is going to go. And I'll illustrate it for you. One answer to that question might be the city. And certainly under Iowa law, cities are granted the authority to go out and do public improvement projects. You can build infrastructure. You do it probably every year. You're out doing some form of infrastructure or another. And the question for you there then becomes, how are we going to pay for it? If the city's going to do it, we're going to go through public bidding, hire a contractor in accordance with Chapter 26 to get the infrastructure built. How are we paying the contractor? And again, you've got divergent paths, but one way might be to say, we have enough money in our cash reserves, we can float the $250,000. In which case, from a TIF perspective, we would help you document an internal loan of money. Maybe it's from the general fund, maybe it's from one of your utility reserves, wherever the money is on your books. We would help you document an internal loan, pass a resolution, you would move the money on the books, you'd pay your contractors out of that lending fund, and then if and when TIF becomes available later, you would repay the general fund or the utility fund. A second option is an external loan. You go to the local bank. You could offer them any kind of legal debt that the city could enter into for the project. Most often, a general obligation note or a pure TIF note. Either way, either one is legal. The general obligation note, you could pay it with the TIF, but if the TIF never came in, you would have to levy the debt service tax on everybody in town. That's the nature of geodebt. taxes get paid relative to that increased tax burden. If the valuations don't go up, there will never be an increased tax burden, and there won't be new increased tax dollars, and therefore there will be no TIF. If the property valuations do go up, and the property owner winds up being deadbeat and doesn't pay the taxes, and everything gets tied up in tax sale for a couple of years, there will be no TIF dollars because the increased property tax dollars are not flowing. I don't say these things to be depressing, even though I probably am because I'm a lawyer. I say these things to illustrate the risk, right? And so there is always risk. If we talk in light of that risk back through those three types of debt, we can highlight who's taking the risk. If the city advances the money out of its general fund reserves to pay the $250,000 infrastructure cost, who's taking the risk?
Somebody else has to answer
Yeah.
this question.
The city's taking the risk, right?
Right.
You're writing the check, it's your cash asset. If the TIF never flows in, you're not getting your $250,000 back. It's your risk. If you go to the bank and you do a general obligation note, who's taking the risk? Well, it's the city taking the risk. I'll answer it for you. Yes, you're borrowing the money from the bank, so they've got some risk. But if you do a GO note, you're putting your debt service levy as a backstop into it. And so if the TIF doesn't flow, the city's taking the risk. You're going to tax everybody in town to get the bank paid off. It's your risk. You do a pure TIF note with the bank, where the bank understands if the TIF doesn't flow, the city has no obligation to pay from other sources, then maybe you could argue it's the bank taking your lender, understanding and taking the risk. In Iowa, most of my city clients would find a way to repay the bank anyways, so morally speaking, it would probably still be the city taking the risk, because I'm yet to find a city that would tell the bank to just eat it. But maybe someday that'll happen. If you go to the third scenario, which happens to be my favorite because I represent cities all the time, the negotiated TIF contract or rebate agreement, who's taking the risk if the developer fronts the money for the infrastructure?
Developer.
Developer, right? They're fronting the money. And in many, many circumstances, I would tell you that's the appropriate answer. If the infrastructure, in my example, is truly just being put in to help facilitate private development, and the developer is the one who's going to enjoy the profits from their successful business and all of that, in many circumstances, it's probably appropriate from a public policy standpoint to expect them to take that risk. And it's terrific from a public policy standpoint for the city to be able to allow the TIF dollars to flow back into the deal to help over time, alleviate that risk for the developer. You'll see in the packet that I gave you a procedural, not the procedural outline, a couple of worksheets that I've provided you. These are the types of things that we would have you folks fill out leading up to doing an urban renewal plan. One of them relates to if the city were paying for the infrastructure itself. You'll see the infrastructure project worksheet. You fill that out if the city was going to be the one paying for the infrastructure and going to the bank and borrowing the money or doing the internal loan. You'll then also see a TIF incentive project worksheet. That would be the type of thing that we would have you fill out leading up to a rebate type agreement or other economic development support arrangement. And then right behind those, you'll also see an outline of a rebate agreement. Again, we're not going to run through all these, but these really are negotiated contracts with back and forth expectations between parties that get memorialized into an agreement. And so I've tried to highlight some of the major sort of categories of terms that we help our city clients and county clients work through when they are negotiating these sorts of TIF payment contracts with private parties. And so you'll see provisions in there that we always talk through with our city clients about what are you wanting the private party to do. And then we'll of course always have provisions in them related to what the city is going to do in return. The standard rebate model applies to the scenario I just walked you through. If John is the property owner or the business owner, we would draw up an agreement that might say, you know, John is going to build his project, he's going to pay his property taxes, maybe he's going to employ 10 people when the project is completed. In addition, John's going to put the money up front for doing the necessary infrastructure. And in return, the city is going to then agree to do a series of TIF payments back to John. But those payments are only going to be made if I build my project, if the county assessor increases the valuation so my tax burden goes up, the taxes flow in, the city claims the appropriate share into the TIF fund, and then from the TIF fund, you would write the rebate checks back to me over a period of years. And if you followed me on the mechanics of TIF, the rebate payments I would receive would not be quite as high as my total tax burden because of the dollars that get filtered out for the base and filtered out for the protected levies. I'll stop there and let you guys ask me some questions if I've spurred any, or if you have all run away to the local tavern. I would not blame you at this point.
A few of us are still here.
We lost a couple. I think that answers my question. Explains it well.
John, quick question. Can you hear me all right?
John, can you hear the question?
No, I'm sorry, I couldn't hear that.
I think Ben's going to come a little closer.
John, quick question. Is there any scenario where the city or school district will incur any type of risk if the developer, that third option where the developer fronts or incurs the debt to put in the infrastructure? Is there any scenario that you could think of that's ever happened?
Well, I mean,
Anyway,
I'll speak to the city. In terms of any fiscal risk, direct fiscal risk, there should be none to the school district. They would not typically be a party to those types of agreements. On the city front, in a standard deal without a lot of moving parts that we haven't even discussed tonight, no. I mean, that if the document is drawn up the right way, it's going to say, developer, you front the cash for the infrastructure, and the city will make payments to you out of the TIF money that comes in off of your property, and exclusively from that source, over a period of years. And when we draw up the contracts, they will say if the TIF doesn't flow in, the city is not liable to the developer in any way, above and beyond whatever the TIF revenue stream actually is. So in the kind of scenario we talked about tonight, there should not be any additional element of risk to the city other than if the constitutional debt limit is, and making sure that, for example, you're not using all of your debt limit up on economic development rebate type agreements when you might need to be repaving Main Street next year or changing out the filters at the water station or whatever, right? So you have to manage that debt limit. It has become very, very common practice all across the state for cities to use what we call annual appropriation language in their TIF incentive deals. Annual appropriation language is a set of legal terms that can be written into documents to make it so that you are not creating a constitutional debt burden when you enter into the agreement. That's the upside. The downside of it is for the private property owner or the developer or business, the language is written in a way that literally makes it so that each and every year the city council must make a determination to go ahead and let the TIF money flow. And I bring this up because I have the understanding that you guys are probably at the beginning stages of starting to negotiate an agreement. It's really important for both the city and the developer to understand that in most circumstances we have to put annual appropriation language into a deal in order to make it even possible for the city to participate. And so I bring that up in these sessions usually because it's not something that can be brought up at the last hour. It's too big of a game changer to bring up as a surprise later on. All of the starting point agreements that we draft for our city clients all across the state start off with annual appropriation in them, and probably 49 times out of 50 wind up with them staying in, and only in the rare circumstance, the rarest of circumstances, can a city actually absorb the hit against the debt limit. So it's just something that will have to be analyzed and kind of taken in turn as you go through negotiations from deal to deal. So, are there other questions from the group that I can address before we wrap up?
In your procedure outline, what is an estimated time limit for getting all 13 of those accomplished?
I'm sorry, could somebody a little closer to the speaker just repeat the question for me real quick?
She's coming closer.
So for your procedural outline, you have those 13 items.
Okay.
What's an estimated timeline on getting that completed on average?
It usually will take, at a minimum, it's going to take about 4 weeks start to finish. Starting with a city council meeting, setting a date for a public hearing, and concluding with a second city council meeting about 4 weeks later, at which the hearing would be held. And if you're assuming you're doing a TIF district, the adoption of the ordinance. If the city council is accustomed to doing all 3 considerations to adopt an ordinance, you probably need to stretch that timeline out accordingly. And if you guys meeting once a month?
Yes.
Yeah, so I mean, if you were going to do all 3 readings on an ordinance, it's going to take you, at least 3 months to get the thing set up. If you waive considerations, you can do it in as little as 4 weeks. Then if you're doing a rebate agreement or some other form of debt on the backside of that, you've got to allow the appropriate amount of time to get through the procedural processes for the debt. Rebate agreements that typically just going to add on 1 more month.
Okay.
Is that all the questions that everyone has? Okay.
Thanks, John.
Very
You're
helpful.
welcome.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate the chance to visit with you folks. If other questions come up, my phone number's on the front of the packet. Don't hesitate to contact me directly or let Sonia know.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, you have a good.
Thank you.
Okay.
ASAP.
Is the city paying or are you paying?
Just so that you know, Brenda works for the chamber, and so we've talked about different things as far as just in chamber-wise about how this can affect the overall process. I'm not trying to lengthen anyone's night out, so don't worry. But that's why, you know, you see her here, and I know that she was at your meeting the other night too, just kind of trying to help things move along. We were just talking about some different things from the school standpoint, and I'm sure from the city standpoint.
And John is the best of the best. I'm not just saying, I mean, he is very, very well respected as one of the top bonding attorneys for TIF work in the state of Iowa.
Are you guys doing much TIF work in Ames?
You know, believe it or not, I work for the Ames Chamber of Commerce and Economic Development Commission. I have two responsibilities. I take care of workforce, and I take care of the communities under 2,000 with the contract we have with the county. So my life is very full, and the Gilberts, the Colos, the Zierings. I've only, in 1 year, I've only been to one council meeting.
Okay.
Names of that's because I had to go for leadership aims. So I can't speak to it intelligently. I'm much better versed in Huxley and
They
other
use it
places.
quite a little in Huxley, right?
Just purely because I think, my understanding, and I've just picked up Huxley, is they, for residential developments, have done what Ben has been proposing. And that is they front the cost, the developer does, but then they like to be reimbursed. And right now the community is debating how much they want to reimburse in terms of housing. But, you know, housing has blossomed in that community, and you guys get a glimpse of what just one block of water, sewer, and street runs, and to look at very large divisions. That's why the percentages look weird, you know, because a lot of that new housing tax base is tied up in a district, but unless there's debt, but it's still in part of that district there. But my understanding is even with, we just have worked with 2 industrial projects, even them are a rebate agreement, just by virtue, you heard talk about the constitutional debt limit. You know, you got to be very careful about that. So that's why every year those incentives for the 2 new companies will be brought up. So sorry I can't answer your Ames
No,
question.
that's good. No, that's good.
The map would probably be more telling than I would be on this situation.
Anything else for tonight? You have to go ahead.
We lack a quorum, so. John,
Yeah,
you
we can't,
want to say close?
we can't even adjourn. We gotta stay here.
Too bad.
Get that.
Sorry.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for that. Brenda.
See you? No.
Good to see you.
I tell you, it's always a good refresher.